Have you ever been in a situation where there was something that you wanted, maybe desperately, an object, maybe a possession, a relationship, an achievement, an experience, but you knew that that thing was going to cost you? You wanted it, hoped for it, longed for it, wished for it, but you knew that it was going to cost you. In that situation, you have to calculate and determine, is it worth it? Is the benefit worth the expense? So maybe the thing that you've got your eyes set on, maybe it's going to cost you money. If it's a possession, maybe a car or a home, maybe it's something smaller, a pair of shoes or a new phone. Sometimes it might be an experience, a vacation, a family trip to Universal Studios in Florida. In every one of those situations, if it's going to cost you money, you have to ask yourself, will having this experience be worth the money it will cost? Maybe what you want is going to cost you effort and energy and time. You're going to have to work for it. Maybe it's a college education. Maybe it's a health goal. I want to lose weight. I want to get in shape. Maybe it's a project that you're undertaking for school or work. In those instances, you have to ask yourself, will this achievement be worth the effort? Will it be worth waiting for and working for? You have to do a cost-benefit analysis. You have to weigh the pros and cons. In the end, will what I get be worth what I lose? And life is full of those calculations, right? Those kinds of decisions, those kinds of choices where we have something we want, but we know it's going to cost us. We have to ask, is it worth it? Well, it's one thing if we're talking about a family vacation or a pair of shoes. It's something altogether different when we're talking about life and death. When the question is not just, is this possession worth spending a few dollars, but rather, is this conviction worth me potentially losing my life? And in the 3rd chapter of the Old Testament book of Daniel, we find 3 young Hebrew exiles forced to make that exact determination. They've been taken from their home. They've been stripped of their culture. They've been exiled to Babylon, a foreign land. They've been forced by King Nebuchadnezzar, a pagan ruler, to learn and embrace a new language and a new culture and a new history and a new home and a new way of approaching life and seeing the world. And yet, in their exile, God has not only preserved them and protected them and provided for them, He has blessed them abundantly. He has given them favor with this king, this foreign pagan king. They've been promoted to places of authority in the government. They've been appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, is what we're told in chapter 2, verse 49. But now in chapter 3 of Daniel, they're about to be forced into a situation where they're going to have to weigh their options. Up to this point, they've been able to worship and practice their faith without too much opposition. But now they're going to have to make a choice. Is faithfulness to God worth it? Is obedience to Him and His commands worth it? Or will it end up costing them more than they're willing to give? So I want to invite you this morning to take a Bible, turn to the Old Testament book of Daniel, to chapter 3. If you're using a pew Bible, that will be on page 739. Page 739 in those pew Bibles. Daniel chapter 3. And as I read the chapter, as you follow along, I want you to listen for the demands that are made on these 3 young men, the choice that they make, and then how it turns out for them in the end. So let's read together Daniel chapter 3, beginning in verse 1. The Holy Spirit speaks to us through Daniel when he writes these words. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, or 90 feet, and its breadth 6 cubits, or 9 feet. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace." Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image, and whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you've set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated, and he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him and set aside the king's commands and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own. Therefore I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of our God stands forever. Now let me give you some quick background here. If you were here last week, or if you just know the story, you may remember that in chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar had this dream. It was a dream of the statue of a man made up of various metals. It had a gold head, it had a silver chest, it had thighs of bronze, it had legs of iron, and then feet of iron and clay. And each of those pieces, each of those metals represented a different human empire. In the interpretation of the dream, Daniel explicitly states that Nebuchadnezzar and the kingdom of Babylon is the gold head, but the other kingdoms aren't explicitly identified except as just subsequent world powers. Well, the climax of the king's dream was when a stone, not cut by human hands, strikes the base of the statue, destroying the whole thing, turning it to rubble, blown away by the wind, and then that stone grows into a mountain that fills the whole earth. So the stone represents the eternal, all-powerful kingdom of God that will conquer and outlast every human kingdom. Now you might think the lesson that Nebuchadnezzar would have taken from the interpretation of that dream would have been something like, hey, you know what? My kingdom isn't going to last forever, so maybe I should invest in something that will last, in some sort of eternal pursuit. Or maybe, there is a greater kingdom than mine, so maybe I should pursue that kingdom and submit to its king. Or maybe even God has entrusted me with this authority, so maybe I should be a good steward of it. Those would all be great lessons for him to have taken from that dream and the interpretation of it. Instead, it appears that his only takeaway was, I'm gold, baby. Right? I am the head of gold. I am the King of Kings. I don't care what the rest of the dream said. I don't care what it meant. I'm going to set up a tribute to me, to my kingdom, to my gods. And the passage uses that language over and over. I don't know if you heard it. The image that Nebuchadnezzar set up. Nebuchadnezzar set up his image. Even though back in chapter 2, verse 20, Daniel declares that God sets up kings, Nebuchadnezzar decides he's going to be the one doing the setting up. And this image he will set up will serve a couple of reasons. It will serve to draw attention to him, but also to unify the kingdom in allegiance to and worship of himself so that he will be known and remembered. Interestingly enough, in that same land where the king is setting up his image, the land of Shinar, back in the book of Genesis, another group of people in Genesis 11 tried to set up a tower to the heavens to make their name great. And what did God do? He scattered them. Now King Nebuchadnezzar is trying to do the same thing they were unable to do, make his name great, while attempting to undo what God did in the scattering of people and instead bring them all back together again and unite them under his name and his authority. And he does this, or attempts this, by means of an image and a command. He sets up this towering golden pillar, this spire that is 90 feet tall. That's about the height of a 8 or 9 story building, and only 9 feet wide at the base. There have been scholars who wonder how it even stood up without tipping over. But there's nothing else even close to that height anywhere around it. It's intended to be conspicuous, to draw attention, to dominate the landscape, so that when you draw near, that's the thing that you see. That's the thing that you notice. And it's intended to impress, to dazzle and intimidate, just like the king himself. It is a physical embodiment of his power, his rule, his gods, and his kingdom. It's got his stamp on it, and he wants everybody to know it. You see this even today, right? It's not enough for people to build tributes to themselves, to their name, to advance their reputation and their legacy. They want everybody to know it. They want everybody to celebrate it. They want everybody to affirm it and validate them. And so the king holds a dedication ceremony where all the kingdom officials can come and tell him how great he is and how impressive he is, and pledge their loyalty to the state, to the king, to the kingdom. And it's expressed by a command that when the orchestra plays, and you see this in the king's edict, it's like he wants everybody to know how big the band is, right? Here are all the instruments I have at my disposal. And so he names them over and over and over again. Even all the officials, he names their titles just to try to boast in all the people that he has under them. But the command is, when the orchestra plays, all who hear it are to bow down with their face to the ground and worship the image. You can have your own beliefs, you can worship your own gods, but don't let them get in the way of bowing down to what we tell you to. And the command comes with a threat. If you don't bow down and worship, you get thrown into the furnace and consumed by fire. What is the cost here? It's death by burning. So the people gather, the music plays, and everyone, those from every people, nation, and language, conquered and collected by Nebuchadnezzar, they all bow down and they worship, almost as though they have no choice, no will of their own, no agency. It's almost mechanical, like Pavlov's dog, right? You hear the bell, the dog starts to salivate. Here, you hear the music, you hit the ground, you worship. They have to do it. And you can understand that maybe, right? I mean, imagine the pressure. You've got the authority of the king demanding this of you. You've got the dominance of this image looming over you. You've got the severity of the threat if you don't comply. And you've got the coercion of the crowd all around you doing what you've been told to do. Who could resist that? Who could stand up to that kind of pressure? And please, before you think in your heart, well, I could, I would, I'd be the one standing up. I'd be the one refusing to bow down. Do you? Like now, today, in your life, in this world, do you? In all the small ways, with all the insignificant pressures that you face, do you resist? Do you stand? How often do you find yourself resisting the pull of the culture or the pressure of your friends or the demands of your political party or the requirements of your classmates or your teammates or your coworkers and stand alone? So having seen an image and heard a command, we now encounter an accusation and a confrontation. A group of Chaldeans, these would have been the king's professional astrologers, men who were probably jealous that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had been promoted while they got passed over. They either notice themselves or they get word that 3 of the Hebrew exiles serving as trusted advisors to the king are not complying. They're not playing along. They're not submitting to the king and his command. They are not bowing down and worshiping the image he set up. And of course, you have to wonder how anybody knew if they were supposed to have their face down to the ground worshiping. How could they be looking around, noticing who's not doing that? It's like, you remember growing up when one of your kids would accuse one of the other kids of not closing his eyes when he's praying? And your answer is always, how do you know? Right? They're not bowing down and worshiping. How do you know? But regardless, they go to the king with this accusation, and they charge that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are guilty of treason, that they have refused to serve the king's gods, they've refused to worship the image, that they're defying the king's edict, ignoring his command. And that's not a lie, right? I mean, it's the truth. The 3 Hebrews are choosing to obey the second commandment. In Exodus 20, verses 4 and 5, God had commanded the people of Israel, "You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them." So these 3 Hebrew men, they're obeying God's law, they're honoring God and keeping his command. And that's the accusation brought against them. And we're told that, and it makes sense, that Nebuchadnezzar, upon receiving this news, is furious. You see that fire image already, right? Furious, infuriated. His rage is inflamed. He is burning hot inside himself like a furnace. But he doesn't immediately have them punished. In a rare display of self-control, the king calls for these 3 young men to stand before him. And he asks them if these charges are true. And before they can answer, he mercifully gives them an opportunity to prove the accusers wrong. He offers them one more chance to prove their loyalty to him and to his gods and to his empire. But at the same time, he reiterates the threat if they refuse. And he ends his confrontation with a challenge, with an arrogant boast. Did you hear what he said? Who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? See, just the dripping arrogance and conceit, right? The boasting and the pride. In effect, he's saying, you may not like what I'm telling you to do, but what are you going to do about it? I am the King of Kings. My dream said so. I have the kingdom, I have the power, I have the might and the glory, I have the authority to rule, I am golden, I am in charge, I call the shots, your life is in my hands, I possess the power of life and death, I am supreme, who will stop me? You will worship what I have made, or you will die. So is it worth it? On the one hand, you've got the person and the character and the commandment of God. On the other hand, you've got the threat of a fiery death. What options do they have? Well, option one, they can cave and bow down and worship. They can do exactly what they're commanded to do. Option two, Maybe you've thought of this in your head. Well, if I was in that situation, can't you just bow down physically but not worship, since worship is an activity of the heart and an attitude of the heart, and nobody would really know if you're worshiping anyway? Can't you just sort of bow your head and maybe comply outwardly but not inwardly, just sort of go along to get along? Maybe say a silent prayer to my God, even as I'm bowing down before this golden image. I mean, after all, there are other Jews around there, other exiles who need Jews in those positions of influence, positions of leadership, for advocacy, for protection. If Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego die, who's going to speak on behalf of the rest of the exiles? You can see how easy it is to rationalize, right? Option 3, they can just go out cursing the king, ranting, raving, protesting, go out in a blaze of defiant rage. They don't do any of those things. Instead, they respond with a confession and a determination. They appeal to the ability and the pleasure of God, and they confidently, calmly, respectfully commit themselves to Him. They answer the king's boast that they are not going to argue about which God will deliver them. We don't often know, we can't know what God will do, but they know what God can do. And they tell the arrogant, violent king that their God, the one true God, is able to deliver them from the furnace and from the hand of the king if He pleases. After all, He's done it before, right? He delivered the people of Israel from the furnace of slavery in Egypt. He promises to deliver His people in the Psalms. Psalm 34:7 says, the angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear Him, and He delivers them. So they know what God can do, but maybe more importantly, they know what they will not do. If God chooses not to rescue us from death, they say, even then we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. You hear it? We don't know what God will do, but we know what He can do, and most importantly, we know what we will not do. What mattered to them was not deliverance, but obedience. Not security, but worship. They didn't try to predict God's ways, but rather to hold to His word. And really, that's the miracle, right? Not what happens after that, not how the story ends. The miracle is that these 3 young men have the boldness and the courage to declare in the face of the king that faithfulness to God is worth it, even if it costs them their lives. Even if they lose everything, He's worth it. What follows is an attempted execution. Once again, in response to the determination of these 3 Hebrew men, the fires of Nebuchadnezzar's anger burn, but even hotter this time. He's even more angry, even more infuriated, and he demands that the heat of the furnace be increased to match the rage in his own heart. Maximum heat, as hot as you can get it. And then he orders the strongest of his men to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego immediately without even stripping them of their courtly garments. Everything's so extreme and excessive, right? The hottest heat, the strongest men. The furnace, I don't know if you've ever wondered this, what exactly did it look like? How was it constructed? The furnace is likely built into a hillside or a cliff facing. It's probably used to fire bricks. That was probably what they used it for in normal cases. And so it would have a large opening at the top, accessible by that hilltop, used to add fuel to the fire. And then maybe several openings at the bottom used to insert and retrieve bricks, openings that you could look into. And as the three Hebrew men are taken up to the top to be thrown into the furnace, the fire has gotten so hot, those flames are leaping out of the top, and the mighty men whose job it is to throw them in are catching fire themselves and being incinerated. That's how hot it is. But regardless, these men have the ability, before they burn to death and turn to ash, to push Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the furnace, and they fall into the fire. Now, Nebuchadnezzar likely thought that was going to be the end of the story, right? And they fell into the fire. Period. What's next? Everyone did. Assumed that was it. It had required a little bit of extra fuel. They had lost some good, strong servants, but at least those defiant Hebrews are gone. Except when the king peers into the door at the bottom of the furnace, expecting to see three bound, burning corpses, he sees not three men, but four. All unbound, walking around in the midst of the fire, unhurt. And he says the fourth man looks like a son of the gods. Some sort of divine appearance. So they're not dead, right? They're not burned. They don't die. And they are free and unbound. Somehow, miraculously, the ropes that they've been bound with burned, but nothing else burned. And they are joined by this fourth figure. Who is he? Well, we don't know exactly. Nebuchadnezzar later on says he's an angel. Other scholars believe that he might be the Son of God, an Old Testament pre-incarnate appearing of Christ. And either of those could be the case. We're not told, presumably because we don't need to be certain. But what we can and do need to be certain of is that this figure represents the presence of God with them. God has not abandoned them to the flame. God has not forsaken them to death. He is with them in the fire, preserving them. He didn't keep them from the furnace. Now, God, in all of his power, could have rescued them before they even got thrown in, right? He doesn't keep them from the furnace, but he's present with them in it. They are exposed to the flames, but they are kept through them. And then the story closes with a declaration and a promotion. The king calls the three men out of the furnace. He has them examined, finds them not only unharmed, but perfectly preserved. Says not even a hair of their head has been singed. I've done worse than that with the hair on my arms grilling out, right? He says they don't even smell of smoke. If you've ever sat around a campfire, that may be the greatest miracle of all right there. That they don't even smell of smoke. And then, having seen the deliverance with his own eyes, Nebuchadnezzar blesses God, issues a decree that no one can speak against the God of the Hebrews. Interestingly, he still hasn't seen quite enough to say that this is my God now. It is still their God. But he says no one can speak against their God under penalty of death. And then he promotes the three men to an even higher station in Babylon. So what's our takeaway from this account, this narrative, this story? What is the lesson? What are we intended to learn? What are we intended to understand? What are we supposed to believe? Well, let me be clear. The lesson is not, don't go along with the crowd, stand for what you believe. That is a Christless message. That is a gospel-less message that fits better in a 1980s ABC after-school special, right? That's where you hear that kind of message. In a special called assembly where you get all the students in the school together and bring in a motivational speaker. Don't go along with the crowd. You stand for what you believe. That's not the takeaway. And it's also not, if you do what's right, God will keep you from suffering. That's not the message either. That is a false gospel that promises nothing bad will happen to you if you just make good choices. In this case, that's how it worked out, according to God's purpose, but that's never a guarantee. No, the message for us is this, and I give it to you in 3 parts. First, faithfulness to God is worth it because He will be with us in our suffering, either delivering us from it like He did here, or strengthening us to endure it even to death as He has done throughout the history of the church with countless martyrs. He will be with you. He may not protect you or preserve you from the flames. He may not keep you from the fire, out of the furnace, but He will be with you in it, either delivering you or strengthening you to endure it even to death. God was with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He was with them in their exile in Babylon, even though their temple back in Jerusalem, that picture, that representation of His presence had been torn down. He was still with them. At the right moment in history, God sent His Son Jesus to be Emmanuel, which means what? God with us. For believers today, His Holy Spirit dwells in us. In 1 Peter 4:12-14, we're encouraged, "Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you, but rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when His glory is revealed. If you are insulted for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you." You can endure the fiery trial. Why? Because God is with us through His Holy Spirit. He's worth it, even if it costs us everything, because He promises to be with us. Second, faithfulness to God is worth it because He will deliver us from final judgment. Because Christ suffered and died in our place and rose again. Because Jesus faced the fires of death, suffered its sting, and defeated it by walking out of the tomb, just like those 3 Hebrew young men walked out of the furnace. Because of that, we will ultimately live if we have trusted in Him. In Matthew 13, verses 42 and 43, Jesus says one day He will return with His angels to gather, He says, all lawbreakers and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. But then He says this, then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Those who know and love and trust Christ will be rescued from the fire of judgment to shine like the sun. And then third, because of those 2 truths, because He will be with us in our suffering here and will ultimately deliver us from judgment one day, because of that, we can stand boldly and confidently against the gods of this world, even when no one else does, even if it costs us everything. Do you believe that this morning? And I'll be honest, you may have never lived like that. Your life may be a series of falling down and worshiping what you're told to worship. But I want to tell you confidently, because of what Jesus has done, because of what God has promised, you can stand. boldly and confidently against the gods of this world, even if you're all alone, even if it costs you everything, you can. What are the false gods that we're tempted to join with the world in bowing down to? Money, wealth, political power, pleasure, entertainment, sports. And how are we tempted to bow? Maybe it's not in like big obvious ways where like I'm giving all of my life, I'm giving all that I am and all that I have to this thing. Maybe it's just in small ways, not forsaking Jesus, but putting him second. Choosing other commitments over gathering with the church. Giving our time to temporal pursuits instead of time in his word and in prayer. Spending our money selfishly on ourselves rather than showing generosity to those in need. Failing to share the gospel with those who desperately need to hear it because we're afraid of men. And how can we stand? We stand by declaring, along with the three young men, I don't know what God will do, but I know what he can do, and most importantly, I know what I will not do. Plant your feet. Stand firm. Make a commitment, make a resolution, and stick with it. Understand that the world will hate you for not bowing down to its gods, but it's okay. You may suffer. You may lose the respect of other people. You may lose friends. You may lose opportunities. If you choose sports over, or church over sports, your kids may lose a spot on the team. If you choose generosity over pleasure, you may lose out on some experiences that other people get to enjoy. If you choose to pursue holy living, there may be some parties that you don't get invited to. But it's worth it. He's worth it. Even if it costs you everything. Faithfulness to Jesus is worth it. Let's pray together.